The frost had already begun its assault on the windows by 6 o'clock, turning glass into canvas for winter's particular brutality. Riley Morgan stood behind the counter of North Star Diner, watching the thermometer mounted outside the kitchen window. Register negative 18 degrees, and that number carried a lie, because it did not account for wind that cut through fabric and flesh like something with teeth. The television mounted in the corner had stopped pretending this was manageable weather about an hour ago. Now the meteorologist just kept repeating the same words with increasing desperation. Catastrophic conditions. Remain indoors. Hypothermia kills in under an hour. Find shelter immediately. Riley pulled her cardigan tighter even though the diner's heating system was fighting valiantly against the cold seeping through every crack and gap in the building's 60-year-old bones. The North Star had been constructed in 1965 when Whitefish, Montana still believed in its permanence as a railroad town before the economic collapses that transformed thriving into surviving. Chrome trim and red vinyl booths spoke to an era of optimism that felt foreign, now archaeological evidence of better times. But the building had endured through decades of changing ownership and shifting fortunes by occupying the only food stop for 50 miles in either direction along Highway 93. During summer, truckers and tourists kept the place buzzing. Tonight, Riley had not seen a single customer in over 4 hours. Her shift should have ended at 7. Her relief, a woman named Sandra, who had worked here almost as long as Riley had been alive, never showed up. Riley had called her cell phone 6 times, each attempt going straight to voicemail, until she finally gave up and accepted the truth. Highway Patrol had closed the roads an hour ago, which meant Sandra was stuck at home, 20 miles away, safe and warm, while Riley remained stranded in a diner that suddenly felt less like workplace and more like cage. The isolation pressed against her like the cold, tangible, and suffocating in equal measure. She wiped down the counter for what had to be the 10th time that evening, her hands moving automatically through motions that provided no comfort beyond occupation. The portable radio in the kitchen crackled with emergency broadcasts between bursts of static. The National Weather Service had upgraded their warning. The blizzard, which forecasters had predicted would be severe but manageable, had intensified beyond their models. Wind speeds approaching 60 miles per hour. Visibility reduced to 0. Temperature dropping toward negative 25. With wind chill factored in, exposed skin would freeze in under 5 minutes. Riley's phone buzzed against the counter, the vibration loud in the empty diner. Her mother's name glowed on the screen. She answered on the second ring, pressing the device to her ear with fingers that had gone cold despite the heated interior. "Are you still at work?" Her mother's voice carried the particular strain of someone trying to stay calm while failing completely. "The news says it's dangerous to drive. I'm okay, Mom, staying here tonight if it doesn't clear up." The lie came easily practiced from years of protecting her mother from additional worry. "Riley, baby, I saw the forecast. Negative 18 degrees. That's..." Her mother's voice broke slightly. "That's dangerous. The diner has heat and food. I'll be fine." Riley kept her tone light, performatively unconcerned. "How are you feeling?" The pause before her mother answered told Riley everything she needed to know. "I'm okay, just tired. The cardiologist called today. They want to schedule the surgery for Friday." Friday. 3 days from now. Riley's throat tightened. "That's good. That's soon. If we can come up with the money." Her mother's voice carried defeat that hurt worse than any accusation. "The insurance covers some of it, but there's still, Riley. It's $85,000. I don't know how. We'll figure it out," Riley heard herself saying, words she did not believe. "We always do." After they hung up, Riley pulled up her bank account on her phone and stared at the number displayed there. $847. She was $84,153 short of saving her mother's life. The math was brutal and simple and completely insurmountable. Her mother had a congenital heart defect that had been manageable for decades but was now critical. Without surgery, the cardiologist had given her maybe 6 months. With surgery, she could live another 20 years. But surgery cost more money than Riley could accumulate in 6 lifetimes of waitressing at the North Star. She set the phone down carefully as if its fragility mirrored her own and walked to the window. Snow had begun falling again, not the picturesque gentle flakes of Christmas cards, but hard pellets that struck the glass like gravel thrown by an angry hand. The wind howled with a sound that Riley's grandmother used to say meant spirits were walking, though Riley suspected it just meant the building was poorly insulated, and winter in Montana gave no quarter to human construction or human hope. The diner sat 15 miles outside Whitefish proper, a location that made sense for highway traffic, but left Riley profoundly isolated on nights like this when the highway became impassable. The nearest building was a closed gas station 3 miles east. The nearest house was 6 miles west. She was alone in a bubble of light, surrounded by darkness and cold and snow that accumulated in drifts already halfway up the windows. Beautiful and deadly in the particular way that Montana winter always was punishing people for the hubris of existing in a place that barely tolerated human presence. Riley thought about her father, as she always did, when the building felt too empty and her thoughts spiraled toward despair. Michael Morgan had worked in this kitchen for 20 years. Head cook, the kind of man who knew every regular customer by name and preference. She had grown up spending afternoons in the corner booth doing homework, while her father's laughter echoed from behind the counter, while the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee created an atmosphere of safety that felt permanent until it was not. He had died here 8 years ago, collapsed next to the industrial stove during an evening shift. Heart attack, the doctor said. 49 years old. Too young, too sudden, too devastating for Riley at 16 to process beyond the immediate reality of his absence. She had tried leaving after high school, had applied to colleges in Seattle and Portland, and anywhere that felt like escape from a town that held too many ghosts. But every scholarship fell through, every plan crumbled, and eventually she found herself back at the North Star because it was the only place she still felt close to him. Her mother thought she was wasting her life. Her friends, the few who remained in Whitefish, thought she was stuck. Maybe they were right, but grief had a gravity that Riley did not know how to escape, and working in her father's kitchen felt like keeping him alive through sheer force of presence. The lights flickered. Riley's breath caught her eyes jumping to the fluorescent tubes overhead. They dimmed to an orange glow that made the diner look suddenly sinister before brightening again to their normal harsh white. The heating system's fans stuttered, coughed, then resumed their steady hum. Riley released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Please don't go out. The plea felt useless but necessary. Please. She poured herself coffee, her 5th cup of the evening, and settled onto a counter stool. The television continued its loop of emergency broadcasts. The same meteorologist, looking increasingly haggard, stood in front of maps covered in purple and red warnings. This is a life-threatening situation. If you are caught outside, seek shelter immediately. Do not attempt to drive. Hypothermia can kill in under an hour in these conditions. Riley pulled out her phone and scrolled through social media with the particular masochism of someone who needed to see other people's normalcy to feel the full weight of her own isolation. Her best friend Tessa had posted a photo from her apartment in Kalispell, 30 miles north. Fireplace wine glass caption, reading "Blizzard night done right." Riley felt a spike of envy, so sharp it bordered on rage before guilt replaced it immediately. Tessa was a nurse who worked 60-hour weeks and deserved every moment of comfort she could steal. Riley's isolation was circumstantial, not cosmic punishment, even if it felt personal in the way that suffering always did. The wind slammed against the building with enough force to make the windows rattle in their frames. Something metallic screeched outside, probably a trash can or piece of signage torn loose by the storm. Riley made a mental note to check for damage in the morning, assuming the storm broke by then, and assuming the building survived the night intact. The weather report suggested the worst would pass by dawn, but weather reports had been consistently wrong about this storm from the beginning. Riley thought about trying to sleep in the storage room where the previous owner had kept a cot for double shifts, but sleep felt impossible with adrenaline and anxiety singing through her nervous system. She was 24 years old, alone, in a building being battered by a storm that had killed 3 people already, according to the news, with a mother who needed surgery she could not afford, and a life that felt increasingly like a trap he had constructed through inaction and fear. The only thing that made sense was to stay alert, stay busy, stay moving until morning arrived and rescued her from this particular purgatory. She was reaching for the television remote to change channels when she heard it. A sound that cut through the wind and the rattling windows and the general chaos of the storm. Heavy, rhythmic, desperate. Someone was pounding on the door. Riley froze coffee mug halfway to her lips. Every muscle in her body suddenly rigid with a fear that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the fundamental vulnerability of being alone when something unknown demanded entrance. The pounding came again, louder, now more insistent, accompanied by a voice barely audible over the wind, but unmistakably human and unmistakably desperate. Please, we need help. Please. The words were muffled by glass and distance, but carried enough urgency that Riley felt her heart rate spike into something approaching panic. She set down her coffee carefully and slid off the stool, her feet carrying her toward the door, even as her brain screamed warnings about stranger danger and horror movie logic and every cautionary tale she had ever absorbed about women alone in isolated locations. Through the frost-covered windows, she could make out shapes, large shapes, more than one. At least three, maybe four, pressed against the door like supplicants at a temple seeking sanctuary. Riley moved closer, close enough to see more detail through gaps in the frost. The shapes resolved into men, large men, wearing what looked like leather jackets despite the deadly cold. And on the backs of those jackets, even partially obscured by snow and ice, she could make out patches, emblems, the particular insignia that everyone in Montana learned to recognize and fear. Death's head with wings spread, words she could not quite read but did not need to. Hell's Angels. Her blood turned to ice that had nothing to do with the temperature. The pounding intensified, accompanied now by multiple voices all blending into a chorus of desperation. Please, we can't walk anymore, freezing to death out here. Just need shelter. Please. One of the men pressed his face against the glass, and Riley could see his skin mottled red and white with cold lips that looked purple in the dim light, eyes wide with fear that was real and immediate and human. Every survival instinct Riley possessed screamed at her to step back, lock the door. If it was not locked, already call for help, even though her phone had barely any signal. And even if she could get through to someone, what could they do with roads closed and emergency services stretched beyond capacity? These men were Hell's Angels, motorcycle club members, people her uncle had warned her about when she first started working at the diner. You see those colors come through, you smile, you serve them, and you don't ask questions. But you don't trust them either. They're dangerous. They live outside the law. They hurt people, but they were dying right now, right here on the other side of glass thin enough to shatter. She could see it in their faces, in the way they moved, in the particular desperation of people who had pushed their bodies past normal limits and were now operating on fumes and adrenaline and the final reserves that preceded system shutdown. Another 5 minutes outside and they would be past the point where warming was possible. Another 10 and they would be dead. Riley's hand moved to the door handle without conscious decision, her body acting on programming deeper than fear or self-preservation. Her father's voice echoed through her mind with the clarity of memory that felt like haunting. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Riley girl. It's doing what's right when you're terrified. It's acting with compassion, even when survival says be selfish. It's remembering that we're all human under the surface, no matter what uniforms or patches or appearances suggest otherwise. She had been 16 when he said that sitting in this same diner after a man had come in looking homeless and desperate and possibly dangerous. Her father had served him a full meal without charge and sent him away with sandwiches for the road. Riley had asked if that was safe. Her father had smiled sadly and said that safety and goodness were not always compatible, and sometimes you had to choose which mattered more. A year later, he was dead, and Riley had spent 8 years wondering if he would be proud of the woman she had become or disappointed by her fundamental cowardice in all things that mattered. The lock turned under her hand. The moment felt irreversible, like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below or rocks. The door flew open with such force that it ripped from Riley's grip, slamming back against the wall, hard enough to crack the plaster. Wind and snow blasted into the diner, and with them came the 4 men stumbling, more than walking, their movements uncoordinated and clumsy, with hypothermia's particular paralysis. The first one through was massive, easily 6'4" and 250 pounds, with a thick beard caked with ice that made him look less like a man and more like some creature from folklore. He nearly collapsed onto the floor before catching himself against the nearest booth, his hands leaving wet marks on the red vinyl. The others followed each one, looking worse than the last, their faces burned red and raw from exposure, their movements slow and dangerous. Riley threw her weight against the door, fighting the wind to get it closed. One of the men, younger than the others, with a shaved head that made his hypothermia look even more severe, helped her push until finally the door slammed shut and locked out the storm. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was heavy breathing and the relentless howl of wind outside. Riley stood with her back against the door, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, staring at four Hell's Angels, who had just invaded her sanctuary and it might kill her or worse. The bearded one looked up at her with eyes that were starting to regain some focus, some clarity behind the glaze of near death. "Thank you." His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Thank you. We thought we were dead." Riley heard her own voice, smaller than she wanted, stripped of the authority she tried to project. "What happened? Why are you out in this? Broke down?" The younger one with the shaved head answered through chattering teeth. "About 6 miles back. Tried to fix it, but the cold, everything seized up. Tried to walk. Made it this far. Saw your lights. 6 miles in negative 18-degree weather with wind chill that would push it to negative 40 or worse." The fact that they had survived this long was remarkable. That they were conscious and able to speak was miraculous. Another hour, and they would not have been. Riley's training, absorbed from growing up in Montana, where winter killed the unprepared with ruthless efficiency, kicked in and overrode her fear. "We need to get you warm." The words came out automatically, her body moving before her brain caught up. "Sit down, all of you. Don't move too fast. Your bodies are in shock." The men obeyed with the compliance of people too exhausted to argue or resist. They settled into the booths nearest the door, their movements careful and almost childlike in their uncertainty. Riley could see their hands shaking violently, see the dangerous discoloration of their skin, see the way their eyes held distance that suggested they were not entirely present behind the biological machinery of their faces. "I'm going to get blankets and warm water." Her voice came out steadier, now purpose overriding terror. "Don't try to warm up too fast. It's dangerous. You can go into shock." She ran to the storage room, grabbing every blanket and towel she could find, her arms full of fabric that smelled like detergent and dust. When she returned to the dining area, the men had not moved. They sat hunched in the booths, looking less like dangerous criminals and more like refugees, like people who had been broken by circumstances beyond their control and needed mercy they were not sure they deserved. "Here." Riley distributed blankets with hands that shook almost as badly as theirs. "Wrap up. Get the wet layers off if you can. I'll make hot coffee and get warm water for your hands and feet. You're an angel." The bearded one said it quietly with such sincerity that Riley felt something crack inside her chest. A real angel. She retreated to the kitchen, grateful for the counter that created physical barrier between her and them, needing those few feet of distance to process what she had just done. She had let four Hell's Angels into the diner. Four men who wore patches that symbolized violence and criminality and lawlessness. Four men who could hurt her, who could rob her, who could do things she did not want to imagine. But they were also four men who had nearly died and who looked at her with gratitude so profound it bordered on worship. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. The large coffee maker filled with water, and Riley started it, brewing the familiar sound and smell, providing comfort through routine. She filled several containers with warm, not hot water and gathered clean towels. When she returned to the dining area, the men had wrapped themselves in blankets and were starting to look slightly less like corpses. Color was returning to their faces, though they still shook with cold that went bone deep. "I'm Grant," the bearded one spoke first, his voice stronger now, as circulation returned, and his body remembered how to function. "That's Sam, Dylan, and Frank," he pointed to each man in turn. "We're from the Great Falls chapter, heading to Helena for a funeral when the storm hit." Riley nodded, not trusting her voice, and set down containers of warm water and towels. "Soak your hands and feet. It'll help with circulation. The coffee will be ready in a few minutes." The man Grant had identified as Dylan watched her with particular intensity, his eyes tracking her movements in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. He was younger than the others, probably only a few years older than Riley, with a lean face and presence that suggested he missed nothing. Most people would have kept that door locked. His observation carried no judgment, just statement of fact that felt weighted with meaning Riley could not quite parse. "I couldn't let you die." Riley said it simply because it was true, and because any other explanation felt too complicated to articulate. A lot of people could have. Dylan's eyes held hers for a moment longer before he looked away, but Riley felt marked by his attention in ways that were not entirely uncomfortable. The man called Sam, the one who had helped her close the door, flexed his fingers experimentally as he soaked them in warm water. Don't think we have frostbite. We kept moving. That saved us, but if we'd been out there another hour, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Grant shifted in his seat, wincing slightly, and Riley saw past the intimidating exterior to the pain written in the lines around his eyes. How long have you been working here? 6 years, Riley heard herself answering, drawn into conversation despite her lingering fear. My father worked here for 20 years before me. Head cook. He died 8 years ago. This place was his in a way. I guess I kept working here to stay close to him. Something in Grant's expression softened, a recognition passing across his features that suggested he understood that particular grief. I lost my daughter 20 years ago. Emma, she was 7, leukemia. We couldn't afford the treatment fast enough. By the time we raised the money, it was too late. The confession landed between them like something physical, creating connection through shared loss. Riley felt tears pricking at her eyes and looked away, overwhelmed by the sudden humanity of this man who was supposed to be a monster. I'm sorry. The words felt completely inadequate. After Emma died, I made a promise. Grant continued, his voice rough with emotion that 20 years had not softened. Anyone who shows kindness, especially when they have nothing themselves, I help them. It's what she would have wanted. That's why we do charity work through the club. That's why we were riding to Tommy's funeral despite the storm. Because brotherhood means showing up even when it's hard. Riley tried to reconcile the image of Hell's Angels as dangerous criminals with this man talking about his dead daughter and charity work and brotherhood with such obvious sincerity. The pieces did not fit into any framework she had been taught, and the dissonance made her head hurt in ways that had nothing to do with exhaustion or fear. The coffee maker beeped. Riley poured 4 large mugs and brought them out on a tray along with sugar and cream. Drink slowly. It'll help warm you from the inside. Grant took his mug with both hands, holding it like something precious, steam rising to obscure his face. You saved our lives tonight. You know that, right? His voice carried weight that made the statement feel ceremonial binding. I just opened a door. Riley heard the words come out small, diminished by the enormity of what they were trying to dismiss. In this storm, for people like us, Grant's eyes held hers, and Riley saw in them a depth of gratitude that made her throat tight. Most people would have kept it locked. Hell, most people would have been right to keep it locked. We're not exactly known for being safe. I couldn't just let you die. Riley repeated it because it remained true no matter how many times fear tried to override compassion. No, but you could have. Grant's observation was gentle but insistent. A lot of people would have convinced themselves we deserved it. That we chose to ride in winter, chose the lifestyle, chose whatever happened as consequence. People are good at justifying their fear. Dylan spoke up again, his attention still uncomfortably focused on Riley. You're scared of us right now, even though you saved us. Even though we're grateful, you're scared. Riley considered lying, then decided against it. Yes, that's smart. Dylan's approval felt unexpected. Fear keeps people alive. We're strangers wearing colors that have reputation for violence. You should be scared. But here's the thing about fear. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity ratcheting up. Fear tells you when something might be dangerous, but courage is what lets you act anyway when acting is the right thing. You had both tonight. That makes you rare. The lights chose that moment to flicker again, more violently this time. Everyone tensed, watching the fluorescent tubes dim and brighten erratically. The heating system made a concerning, grinding noise. When the power goes out, Sam asked with the practical tone of someone who had dealt with infrastructure failure before. Do you have backup? Riley shook her head. Just the stove. It runs on propane. And flashlights in the storage room. Show me where the propane controls are. Sam stood carefully testing his balance. And the circuit breaker. If the power goes, we need to know what we're working with. It was such a practical, protective gesture that Riley found herself leading him to the kitchen without thinking about whether she should be alone with one of them in a space away from the others. As they checked various systems, Sam moving with the confidence of someone who understood building mechanics intimately, Riley realized she had stopped being quite so afraid. These men were not going to hurt her. Somewhere in the last hour, that knowledge had settled into her bones with certainty she could not logically justify but felt completely. When they returned to the dining area, the storm had somehow gotten even louder. The wind shrieked against the building with rage that sounded almost personal. Frank, the oldest of the four with gray and red threaded through his beard, stood at the window looking out at the wall of white. Haven't seen a storm like this in years. Not since '96. We lost two brothers that winter. Got caught out in weather like this. Nobody found them until spring. The weight of that statement hung heavy in the air. Grant looked at Riley with expression that made her chest ache. You're not going to end up like them. His voice was firm, declarative, allowing no argument. You're safe here. All of you. Grant's face transformed hardness, melting into something that looked almost vulnerable. You're braver than you think. I'm terrified. Riley admitted it because pretending otherwise felt exhausting and pointless. I know. That's why you're brave. Her father's words echoed by a Hell's Angel in a snowstorm. Riley felt tears threatening and looked away before they could become obvious. They settled into new configuration as the hour approached midnight, the formality of server and customer dissolved by circumstance. Riley found herself sitting in one of the booths with Grant across from her, while the other three men claimed the adjacent booth. The candlelight, lit as precaution against the inevitable power failure, transformed the diner into something almost cozy, intimate, a bubble of warmth and light against the darkness pressing in from all sides. Can I ask you something? Dylan's voice carried across the small space. Why are you here working night shift alone in a place this isolated? Riley wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, grateful for something to hold. It's my job. That's not what I mean. Dylan's eyes held that particular intensity again. You're young. You're clearly smart. This place, it's not exactly a career. There has to be more to it. Riley felt the resistance rising, but then Grant spoke, his voice gentle. We shared our stories. Fair's fair if you want to share yours. But no pressure. We're just trying to understand the woman who saved us. Something about the way he said it without demand or expectation made Riley's defenses crumble. My father died here 8 years ago. Heart attack while he was working the evening shift. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Her throat felt tight, but she pushed through. He was only 49. Too young. Too sudden. I was 16. I'm sorry. Frank's voice carried the rasp of someone who had smoked too many cigarettes and lived too hard, but retained capacity for genuine compassion. That's a hell of a thing to survive. When I graduated high school, I didn't know what to do with myself. Riley found the words coming easier, now pulled out by their attention. College felt wrong. Leaving town felt wrong. This place, it was where I still felt close to him. So I started working here. That was 6 years ago. You're keeping his memory alive. Sam said it like observation rather than judgment. That's noble or pathetic, Riley countered, depending on who you ask. My mom thinks I'm wasting my life. My friends think I'm stuck. Are you happy? Dylan asked the question that cut to the center of everything. Riley opened her mouth to answer and realized she did not know. I don't know. Sometimes. It's familiar. Safe. Until tonight. Until tonight. Grant repeated, a small smile playing at his lips despite everything. The conversation continued for hours, barriers dissolving in the candlelight and shared vulnerability. Grant told stories about life on the road, about brotherhood that transcended blood, about the freedom that came from living authentically even when society judged you for it. Sam talked about his work as a mechanic, how he could diagnose problems by sound alone, how fixing things gave him purpose. Dylan revealed he had been a teacher before joining the club, middle school English, until he realized he was living someone else's dream instead of his own. And Frank, quietest of them all, talked about his daughter, how she had been so angry when he joined the club 40 years ago, how they had not spoken for 15 years, how she had finally reached out 5 years ago after her own divorce, saying she finally understood what it meant to need to be yourself even if it cost you everything. We have dinner every Sunday now. Frank's weathered face softened in the candlelight. She brings her kids, my grandkids. They call me Papa Bear because of all the leather. Riley found herself sharing things she rarely talked about. Her fear of being stuck. Her dreams of maybe writing, of telling the stories her father had collected from travelers over 20 years. Her guilt about not being more doing, more achieving, more. Her loneliness in a town where she knew everyone, but felt known by no one. You know what I think? Dylan leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on Riley. I think you're not stuck. I think you've been waiting for what. Riley's voice came out smaller than she intended. For a reason to believe you could do more. For proof that you're brave enough. He gestured around the diner. You got your proof tonight. The wind slammed against the building with such force that everyone jumped. A loud crack echoed from somewhere outside, something breaking under the storm's assault. Sam moved to the window, assessing. Tree branch maybe, part of the sign, nothing structural. They relaxed again, but the moment had reminded them of reality. They were still trapped, still at mercy of elements that cared nothing for human need or human plans. But Riley realized she was not afraid anymore, not of these men anyway. She was afraid of the storm, of the cold, a very real possibility that the building might not survive the wind. But the men who had stumbled through her door as frightening strangers had become something else entirely. Thank you. Riley said it suddenly, the words pulled from somewhere deep. For talking to me. For treating me like I'm more than just a scared girl who opened a door. You're not just anything. Grant's voice was firm, almost fierce. You're the woman who saved 4 lives tonight when it would have been safer to let us die. Don't you ever forget that. Riley nodded, not trusting her voice, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault. But inside the North Star diner, as candles burned low and coffee grew cold, 5 people who should have been strangers had become witnesses to each other's humanity. And sometimes Riley realized that was the bravest thing of all. Sam, still at the window, suddenly tensed. His voice cut through the comfortable silence with edge that made everyone alert. Guys, there's headlights out there." Everyone froze. Grant's face went hard in ways that reminded Riley these men had lived violent lives. Who the hell would be driving in this storm? Sam pressed closer to the glass, trying to see through the snow. Large vehicle. Truck maybe. Coming this way. Dylan was on his feet, moving toward the window with speed that suggested training rather than panic. Could be nobody. Could be trouble. Grant stood as well, his entire demeanor transforming from grateful refugee to something dangerous and prepared. Everyone stay calm. Riley's heart began hammering again, fear flooding back with force that made her dizzy. Who is it? Through the blowing snow, headlights resolved into vehicle. A large truck pulling into the parking lot, engine noise audible, even over the storm. 3 men climbed out, and even at distance, even through the weather, Riley could see patches on their vests. Different patches, different colors. Grant's face went pale, then flushed with something that looked like rage mixed with fear. How did they find us? Riley's voice came out barely above whisper. Who are they? Dylan moved to the other window, his entire body tense. Iron Wolves MC. Grant cursed with venom that made Riley flinch. Riley, get behind the counter. Right now. Sam's voice was tight. Issues. They tried to kill 2 of our brothers last month. The Iron Wolves pounded on the door, and through the glass, Riley could see the leader. Older than Grant, maybe mid-40s, with scarred face and cold eyes that held no mercy. His voice carried through the barrier, loud enough to be clear, despite the storm. We know you're in there, Hawk. Come out, and we'll make it quick. Riley realized with horror that spread through her like poison that she had not just saved 4 men from freezing. She had trapped herself in the middle of a war between rival gangs, and the door she had opened in compassion had sealed her inside with violence that was about to explode. Frank moved beside her, his voice surprisingly calm. Get behind the counter. Stay down. This is about to get very bad. Dylan pulled a gun from his boot, the metal catching candlelight. How many are out there? Grant already had his own weapon drawn. 3 that I can see. Could be more in the truck. The leader's voice came again, louder, more threatening. We've got all night, Hawk, and the girl in there. She's just collateral now. Come out, or we come in. Riley's breath stopped. She was not just witness anymore. She was target. She was leverage. She was collateral damage in a conflict she did not understand and had not chosen. Grant looked at her with something like respect mixed with apology. Dylan, Sam, cover the back. Frank, you're with me, Riley. He paused, seeming to recalculate. Actually, no. Riley, tell me, do you have any weapons in this place? Kitchen knives? Riley heard her voice come out steadier than she felt. Baseball bat in the storage room. That's it. Get the bat. Grant's voice carried command that brooked no argument. And stay low. If shooting starts, you hit the floor and you stay down. Riley moved toward the storage room, her legs shaking her mind, screaming that this could not be happening, that opening the door in compassion could not have led to this. But Dylan's hand caught her arm, gentle but insistent. His eyes held hers with intensity that made everything else fade for just a moment. You're going to be okay. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. I promise you we're not letting anything happen to you. You saved us. Now we save you. That's how this works. Then he let her go and moved toward the back of the diner, gun held with professional competence that raised questions Riley did not have time to process. She grabbed the bat from the storage room, the weight of it solid and real in her hands, and returned to find Grant and Frank positioned near the front windows, both armed. Both waiting. Outside, the leader's voice rang out one more time. Last chance, send out the Fed, or everyone dies. Riley's world tilted sideways. The Fed. What did that mean? She looked at Dylan, saw him tense, saw something like guilt flash across his face before it hardened into resolve. But there was no time for questions, no time for anything except the terrible understanding that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm about to break inside, and Riley Morgan, who had opened a door in compassion, was about to discover whether courage was enough when mercy turned to violence. The words hung in the frozen air like something solid and dangerous. Send out the Fed. Riley's mind struggled to process what that meant, why the Iron Wolves leader outside would call one of the Hell's Angels a federal agent, why Dylan had suddenly gone rigid with tension that looked like recognition rather than confusion. Before she could form the question burning in her throat, Grant moved with speed that belied his size, crossing the distance to Dylan in 3 strides. We need to tell her. Dylan's voice was low but carried clearly in the terrible silence that had descended over the diner. Now, before this gets worse, not the time. Grant's response came through clenched teeth, his attention split between Dylan and the windows where shapes moved in the darkness outside. She deserves to know why she's about to die. Dylan's words cut like glass, sharp enough to make Riley's breath stop entirely in her chest. The absurdity of their argument, the casual reference to her potential death, as if it was simply one factor to consider among many, snapped something inside Riley. Her voice came out harder than she intended, stripped of the fear that had been choking her for the past 10 minutes. Know what? What the hell aren't you telling me? Dylan turned to face her fully, and in the candlelight his features looked agonized, torn between competing loyalties that were clearly destroying him from the inside. My name is Dylan Wade. I'm a Drug Enforcement Administration agent. I've been undercover inside the Hells Angels Great Falls chapter for 3 years, building a case against organized drug trafficking operations. The words landed like blows, each one restructuring Riley's understanding of the past 4 hours. The diner seemed to tilt sideways, reality warping around revelations that made no sense, imperfect sense simultaneously. Sam cursed with creative vulgarity and pulled his own weapon, pointing it directly at Dylan's head. The metallic click of the safety disengaging sounded impossibly loud. You son of a bitch. Sam's voice shook with rage that went beyond anger into something approaching betrayal's particular devastation. 3 years, 3 goddamn years you've been lying to us, eating with us, riding with us, brothers, and you're a fucking Fed. Stand down, Sam. Grant's command carried authority. That should have worked, that probably would have worked under normal circumstances, but these circumstances were about as far from normal as circumstances could get. He's a cop. Sam's gun did not waver. He's been spying on us. Building cases. How many of our brothers are going to prison because of him? Riley's thoughts spiraled through implications that multiplied faster than she could track them. Dylan was not who he had claimed. The intimate conversations, the shared vulnerabilities, the moment of connection she had felt, all of it built on foundation of lies. Worse, she was now trapped in a diner with 4 men who might kill each other before the gang outside got a chance to kill all of them. The situation had degraded from dangerous to catastrophic in the space of 30 seconds. I know. Grant's voice cut through the chaos with weight that made everyone freeze. I've known for 2 years. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the wind's relentless assault on the building. Frank's face went pale, then flushed with color that suggested blood pressure spiking toward dangerous levels. Sam's gun shifted slightly, covering both Dylan and Grant, now his expression cycling through disbelief and fury, and something that looked like grief. You've been working with a Fed. Frank's voice came out strangled, each word forced through a throat that seemed to be closing. You've been betraying the Brotherhood, to save the Brotherhood. Grant's response was immediate, forceful. The real traffickers aren't at us, Frank. They never were. It's Iron Wolves. They've been using our territory, our roots, our reputation to move product. When things go wrong, we take the fall. When profits are high, they reap the benefits. Dylan approached me 2 years ago with evidence and a deal. Help him expose the actual criminals, get immunity for our chapter, clean our name. I agreed because it was the only way to save us from destruction we didn't earn. Riley tried to follow the logic, tried to understand gang politics and drug trafficking and federal investigations, but her mind kept snagging on simpler truth. Dylan had lied to her. Grant had lied to his brothers. Everyone was lying to everyone, and she was the only person in the room stupid enough to have acted from genuine compassion without ulterior motive. So the Iron Wolves are here because Sam's voice had lost some of its fury, replaced by something that sounded like dawning horror. Because they found out about him, about the investigation. Someone tipped them off. Dylan confirmed what Riley had already begun to suspect. They know I'm DEA. They're here to kill me and anyone who might be working with me, which means all of you, and collateral damage. His eyes found Riley's, and the guilt in them was so profound she had to look away. Which means her. The leader outside pounded on the door again, his voice carrying threat that needed no amplification. Time's up. You've got 60 seconds to send out the Fed, or we start shooting. Riley felt something inside her snap, rage flooding through veins that had been carrying fear for too long. I opened that door to save you. Her voice came out louder than intended, shrill with emotion she could not control. I let you in because you were dying. And now I'm going to do it because I showed you compassion. Dylan stepped toward her, but she held up the baseball bat like a weapon, like a barrier against lies and manipulation, and the universe's apparent determination to punish kindness. You used me. You used my diner. You used my humanity against me. No, Dylan's voice cracked with emotion that sounded genuine, but how could she trust anything about him now? I didn't know the storm would hit. Didn't know we'd break down. Didn't make us nearly freeze to death. Those were acts of God, Riley. What I did was try to stop very bad people from destroying more lives. Grant moved to position himself between Riley and the door, his body language protective despite everything. She's right to be angry with us. With me. But Dylan didn't bring this storm. He didn't make Iron Wolves into murderers. What he did was give us a chance to stop them before they frame us for crimes that would put every member of our chapter behind bars for life. Frank's voice carried the weight of age and experience. Riley, I know you're scared. Hell, we're all scared. But we're not leaving you. That's not negotiable. You saved our lives. Now we protect yours. That's how brotherhood works. 30 seconds. The shout from outside, accompanied by metallic sound that Riley recognized from movies as guns being cocked, chambers being loaded, violence preparing to manifest. Sam lowered his weapon slowly, the fight draining out of him to be replaced by exhaustion and resignation. This is so fucked. But he holstered the gun and moved to the window. 3 of them outside that I can see. Maybe more in the truck. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Dylan pulled his phone from his pocket, checking the screen with movements that carried desperation. I have backup. FBI and DEA teams in Kalispell, 40 miles north. But they can't move in this storm. Roads are closed. Helicopters are grounded. We're on our own until weather breaks. When will that be? Riley heard herself asking practical questions because focusing on logistics was easier than processing emotional devastation. Weather Service says storm should break around dawn. Dylan's answer carried no comfort. That's 6 hours from now. The window exploded inward with crash of breaking glass and percussion of gunshot. Everyone hit the floor, Riley's baseball bat clattering away as she covered her head with her arms. More shots followed, rapid sequence that sounded like the world-ending bullets punching through walls and shattering dishes behind the counter. Sam returned fire from his position near the window, 3 controlled shots that made Riley's ears ring. In the chaos, Dylan crawled across the floor until he reached Riley, his body covering hers in gesture that was protective and presumptuous in equal measure. She could feel him breathing, feel the warmth of him, smell gun oil and leather, and fierce sweat. His voice came directly into her ear, quiet enough that only she could hear beneath the gunfire. I have a daughter, Sophie. She's 9 years old. If I don't make it out of this, someone needs to tell her I loved her. Tell her I was trying to do something good, even if the methods were questionable. Tell her I thought about her every single day. The raw humanity of the request delivered with such certainty of his own death cut through Riley's anger like nothing else could have. She turned her head slightly, their faces inches apart in the darkness beneath the booth. I'm not your messenger service. You want to tell your daughter something you survive, and tell her yourself. Dylan's expression in the dim light looked like gratitude mixed with surprise. Deal. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving ears ringing and the smell of cordite heavy in the air. Grant's voice cut through the aftermath. Everyone okay? Frank reported in from his position near the kitchen. Good here. Sam, I'm hit. Sam's voice carried pain but not panic. Grazed my shoulder, not serious. Riley Grant's tone shifted to something almost gentle when he addressed her. Alive. Riley managed to get the word out despite throat that felt like it was closing. Terrified but alive. Dylan helped her sit up, his hands careful, respectful, in ways that should have reassured her, but mostly just reminded her that nothing about him was what it seemed. Blood darkened Sam's shirt near his left shoulder, spreading across the fabric in pattern that made Riley's stomach clench. She forced herself to her feet, forced herself to move because movement was better than paralysis. I need to look at that. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Medical supplies are in the back. Sam waved her off. It's a graze. I've had worse. You'll get infection and then you'll be useless. Riley surprised herself with the snap in her tone. Sit down and let me clean it. While she tended to Sam's wound, cleaning it with supplies from the first aid kit she kept stocked better than regulations required, Grant and Dylan conducted quiet conference near the front. Riley could not hear everything they said, but caught fragments. Defensible position, limited ammunition, FBI rescue at dawn. The casual military efficiency of their planning was almost more unsettling than the gunfire had been. Frank positioned himself at the window watching the Iron Wolves reporting movements. They're not leaving, setting up positions around the building. This is a siege now. Riley focused on Sam's shoulder on the mechanical task of cleaning and bandaging on anything except the reality that she was trapped in her father's diner with 4 men she barely knew, while another gang tried to kill them all. Sam winced as she applied antiseptic but did not complain, his jaw clenched against pain that had to be worse than he was admitting. You're good at this, Sam's observation carried note of respect. Medical training, Montana training. Riley's response was automatic. Everyone who grows up here learns basic trauma care. Too many accidents, too much distance to hospitals. My father taught me when I was 10. Smart man. Sam's eyes found hers and Riley saw in them something approaching apology. For what it's worth, I'm sorry we brought this to your door. The door was already here. Riley heard the bitterness in her own voice. I'm the one who opened it. Movement outside drew Frank's attention. More vehicles. His voice carried tension that made everyone alert. Sheriff's cruiser. Riley felt hope surge through her chest for the first time since the siege began. The sheriff. Finally. Someone with authority. Someone who could stop this. She moved toward the door before Grant's hand caught her arm, his grip firm enough to stop her without hurting. Don't. His voice carried warning that went beyond caution into something approaching fear. Sheriff Tom Brennan is dirty. He's on Iron Wolves' payroll. He's the one who told them where to find us. Riley felt the hope drain out of her as quickly as it had arrived, leaving only exhaustion and despair in its wake. The last authority she could have trusted, the final safety net, revealed as compromised. They were completely alone, completely isolated, with no rescue coming, and enemies on all sides. Sheriff Brennan's voice carried through the broken window. Falsely jovial. Riley Morgan, it's Sheriff Brennan. Everything okay in there? Got reports of gunfire. Riley looked at Grant, question clear in her eyes. Grant shook his head fractionally. She approached the door slowly, aware of all the eyes watching her, aware that her next words would determine what happened in the coming minutes. She opened the door just wide enough for her face to be visible, keeping her body behind the frame. Sheriff, these men needed shelter from the storm. They're not threatening anyone. Those men out there, the Iron Wolves, they're the ones shooting at us. Sheriff Brennan's face shifted, warmth draining away to reveal something colder underneath. Riley, you don't understand the situation. The Hells Angels are wanted criminals. You need to come out here where you'll be safe. Riley felt anger replace fear, hot and sustaining. No, Sheriff. You don't understand. I know you're working with them. I know you're dirty. And when this storm ends, when federal agents arrive, everyone is going to know exactly what you are. She slammed the door and locked it, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fury and something approaching exhilaration. She had just declared herself, had chosen a side. had committed completely to whatever came next. Grant's expression mixed surprise and respect. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. Riley heard herself laugh, the sound emerging harsh and slightly hysterical. But I'm done pretending authority means anything when the people with authority are just better criminals. The sheriff's facade had dropped when Riley shut the door in his face. Through the window, they could see him join the Iron Wolves, conferring with their leader in ways that confirmed everything Grant had said. The siege was official now, sanctioned by law enforcement, making their situation not just dangerous, but hopeless. 4 guns outside, 4 inside if you counted Riley's complete lack of any shooting ability. The mathematics were not favorable. Dylan pulled Grant aside, their conversation too quiet for Riley to hear, but she watched body language, saw Dylan's urgency met with Grant's resignation. Whatever plan they were forming, it was not one that inspired confidence. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. The storm continued its assault wind, howling like something sentient and malicious. Inside the diner, the 5 of them settled into exhausted watchfulness, taking turns monitoring the windows, while others rested in brief snatches that could not be called sleep. Riley found herself beside Dylan during one of these vigils, both of them watching the snow swirl through broken glass. I really was a teacher. Dylan's voice startled her, quiet enough not to disturb the others. Middle school English. 7 years before I joined DEA. That part wasn't a lie. What made you switch? Riley asked the question, even though she was not sure. She wanted to know more about him, was not sure that understanding would help or hurt. Student of mine got caught in gang crossfire. 13 years old, walking home from school. Wrong place, wrong time. She didn't die, but she was paralyzed from the waist down. Dylan's voice carried weight of old guilt. I visited her in the hospital, and she asked me why no one stopped the gangs. Why adults let this happen to kids? I didn't have a good answer, so I decided to become someone who could stop it. By lying to people, by infiltrating and manipulating. Riley heard the accusation in her own words, but could not soften them. By doing what was necessary. Dylan's response was not defensive, just exhausted statement of choices made and prices paid. I've lived a lie for 3 years, missed my kids' birthdays, their school plays, their lives, because I was pretending to be someone else. That's the cost. But the result is we're about to take down a trafficking network that moves millions of dollars of heroin and fentanyl through 5 states. That's worth something. Riley wanted to argue, but found she could not. The moral calculus was too complex, too weighted with variables she did not understand. Instead, she asked a different question. The others, Grant and Sam and Frank, are they really criminals? Or is that part of your cover too? They're complicated. Dylan's answer was careful, considered. They've done things I can't condone. Assaults, theft, intimidation. But they're also men who take care of their families, who have codes they live by, who are more honorable than most straight citizens I've known. Grant really did lose his daughter to leukemia. Frank really was estranged from his family for decades. Sam really is just a mechanic who found brotherhood in a place society said he shouldn't belong. They're not good or evil. They're human. Like you. Riley heard herself say it, surprised by the realization. Like all of us. Dylan's expression in the darkness looked grateful for understanding he had not expected. Yeah, like all of us. The quiet moment was shattered by Frank's urgent voice from the other window. They're moving, spreading out around the building. Grant joined him, assessing the situation with tactical eye that suggested military background Riley had not known about. They're boxing us in, cutting off any escape routes. We're not escaping, Sam stated the obvious from his position near the kitchen. We're dug in until dawn or until someone dies. Riley felt the weight of that statement settle over them like something physical. 6 more hours until sunrise. 6 hours until the storm might break and federal agents might arrive and rescue might be possible. 6 hours felt like eternity, measured against the fear that made her heart race and her breathing shallow. She moved to the storage room without conscious decision, needing to do something, anything other than wait for violence or death. Inside, she found her father's old journal, the one he had kept during his 20 years working here. Notes about customer stories they had told, observations about human nature he had compiled like a collection of small truths. She had not looked at it in years, afraid of the pain that memories would bring. But now she opened it, seeking connection to him, needing to feel like he was present in some way. The handwriting was so familiar, it made her throat ache. An entry from 15 years ago caught her attention. Man came in today wearing motorcycle colors. Iron Wolves MC. Ordered coffee, sat for 3 hours watching the door like he was waiting for someone. Paid with $100 bill and told me to keep the change for trouble. I asked what trouble. He smiled and said trouble that hasn't happened yet. Made me uneasy in a way I can't explain. Riley felt ice spread through her chest. Iron Wolves 15 years ago. Her father had encountered them, had felt unease that proved justified because 8 years later, he would die in this building under circumstances everyone accepted as natural. Heart attack, 49 years old, tragic but not suspicious, except maybe it had been suspicious. Maybe it had been murder disguised as medical emergency. She brought the journal to Dylan, her hand shaking. He read the entry, his expression growing darker with each line. He looked up at her, and Riley saw confirmation of fears she had not fully formed until this moment. Your father, Dylan's voice carried gentleness that hurt worse than any accusation. When exactly did he die? What date? August 17th. 8 years ago. Riley heard her own voice, distant and strange, speaking facts that were transforming from biography into evidence. Heart attack. He was working the evening shift. Ambulance came, but it was too late. Dylan pulled out his phone, accessing files that apparently worked offline. He scrolled through images, photographs from surveillance that must have been part of his investigation. He stopped on one enlarged. It turned the screen to show Riley. The photo showed this diner exterior, shot date stamp, reading 8 years and 3 days before Riley's father had died. In the background, visible through the window, a man in Iron Wolves colors sat at a booth. Tommy Hayes. Dylan's identification was quiet. Hell's Angel, not Iron Wolves. He was investigating their drug routes, gathering evidence. He died 3 weeks ago. Official cause of death was heart attack. He was 53, healthy, no history of cardiac problems. We think he was poisoned. Riley felt the world tilt sideways, felt reality reorganizing itself around truth that had been hidden in plain sight for 8 years. My father didn't die naturally. Her voice came out flat, all emotion burned away by revelation too large to process. They killed him, I think so. Dylan's confirmation was devastating in its gentleness. I can't prove it yet, but the pattern matches. Your father saw something, knew something, became a threat. So they eliminated him in a way that raised no suspicions. Rage bloomed in Riley's chest, hot and purifying, burning away fear and replacing it with something harder and more focused. They murdered him, and everyone accepted it. Doctors, police, everyone. Just another tragic death in a small town where tragedy happened and no one asked questions. Grant had approached during this exchange, his face grim. Riley, I'm sorry. We didn't know about your father. If I had made the connection, Dylan and I only started working together 2 years ago. Tommy died 3 weeks ago. That's when we began to see the pattern. How many others? Riley demanded. How many people have they killed and made it look natural? We don't know. Dylan's answer was honest and terrible. At least 5 that we can prove. Probably more. That's why this investigation matters. That's why we needed to build an airtight case. This changes everything for Riley. The diner was no longer just her workplace, her connection to her father's memory. It was a crime scene, a place where murder had occurred and gone unpunished. Her grief, which she had carried for 8 years, transformed into something else entirely. Not just loss, but injustice. Not just absence, but theft. Then we fight. Riley heard herself say it with conviction that surprised her. We survived this night. We make sure Dylan's evidence reaches the FBI. We make sure everyone responsible faces consequences. Her voice grew harder. For Tommy Hayes, for my father, for everyone they've killed. Grant studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, then let me tell you what that looks like. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. Our only advantage is time. If we can hold out until dawn, federal agents can evacuate us and arrest everyone involved. But 6 hours is a long time when people are trying to kill you. What do we need to do? Riley felt transformation completing itself. Grief and fear alchemizing into determination that felt clean and purposeful. Survive. Sam's answer was simple and brutal. Whatever it takes. They worked through the early morning hours, fortifying their position, using tables and equipment to create better defensive barriers, rationing the limited ammunition they possessed, taking turns sleeping in brief shifts that barely qualified as rest. Frank told stories about his grandchildren to keep morale up. Sam joked about worse situations he had survived. Grant maintained steady command presence that kept them focused and functional. And Riley learned to load a gun, Dylan walking her through the mechanics with patience that assumed she might need to use it. She learned about cover versus concealment, about fields of fire, about staying low and breathing through fear. She learned to be a person who could fight rather than just a person who could endure. Around 4 in the morning, Dylan received a text message, his phone somehow catching brief signal. FBI wheels up at dawn. ETA, your location 0600 hours. Confirm you can hold position. He typed back one-handed, confirmed. Be advised multiple hostiles, including local LEO. Come heavy. The response was immediate. Roger that. Hang tight. 2 hours. Grant looked around at their small group at Riley with her baseball bat and borrowed gun at Sam with his injured shoulder at Frank, who was old enough to be everyone's grandfather at Dylan, whose lies had saved them and endangered them in equal measure. 2 hours, and then we're out of this. But outside, they heard new sound. Liquid sloshing, the chemical smell of gasoline carrying through broken windows. Frank's voice went flat with understanding. They're going to burn us out. Riley looked around the diner, her father's place, the location where his memory lived and breathed. These walls held 20 years of his life, 6 years of hers, countless stories of travelers who had stopped here and moved on. The thought of it burning of flames, consuming not just structure, but history and meaning and connection, was almost worse than the thought of dying herself. Dylan's hand found hers in the darkness, his grip solid and real. We're going to survive this, I promise you. Riley squeezed back, accepting the comfort, even as she recognized it might be empty promise from a man whose word had been proven unreliable. But in that moment, it was enough. They were human beings facing impossible odds together, and sometimes that was all courage looked like. Sometimes bravery was just holding hands in the dark while the world burned around you and refusing to let go until the dawn arrived or death decided the matter. Outside, the Iron Wolves began spreading gasoline around the building's perimeter. Inside, 5 people prepared to fight for survival against flames and bullets and time itself. And somewhere in the storm, federal agents raced against weather to reach them before rescue became recovery. The siege was entering its final phase, and no one knew who would still be breathing when the sun finally rose over Montana. The smell of gasoline cut through the cold air like a promise of destruction. Riley watched through the broken window as the Iron Wolves poured accelerant around the diner's perimeter, their movements methodical and unhurried. They knew their targets had nowhere to go. Burning them out was not just strategy, but entertainment, the kind of cruelty that came from certainty of victory. We need to move now. Sam's voice carried urgency that overrode the pain of his wounded shoulder. Once they light it, we have maybe 2 minutes before the whole place is engulfed. The walk-in cooler. Riley heard herself speak before the thought fully formed. It's fireproof, sealed. We can wait out the fire inside. We'll freeze. Frank's objection was immediate, practical, or suffocate. We'll last longer than out here. Dylan moved toward the kitchen, already assessing. Riley's right. It's our only play. Grant made the decision with speed born from years of command. Everyone grab supplies. Water towels, anything we can use. Move. They scattered through the diner with desperate efficiency. Riley grabbed bottles of water from the cooler behind the counter, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. Sam collected towels and blankets despite his injury. Frank emptied the first aid kit into a pillowcase. Dylan and Grant positioned themselves near the kitchen, weapons drawn, covering their retreat route. Outside, the Iron Wolves had finished their preparation. Through the window, Riley watched the leader, the man called Viper, produce a lighter. The flame looked small and almost innocent in his hand, too insignificant to represent the devastation about to unfold. But when he touched it to the gasoline trail, fire erupted with violence that stole Riley's breath. Flames raced around the building's exterior, surrounding them in a ring of orange and red that turned night into hellish parody of daylight. Go! Grant's shout cut through the roar of ignition. Now they ran. Riley felt heat building, already felt smoke beginning to seep through gaps in the walls. The kitchen seemed impossibly far away despite being only 30 feet. Sam stumbled, his injured shoulder affecting his balance, and Frank caught him with strength that belied his age. They reached the cooler door as flames found the back entrance fire spreading with speed that defied logic or mercy. Inside, Dylan held the heavy metal door open, ushering everyone through. Riley was last, and as she crossed the threshold, she looked back at the diner. Her father's workplace, her sanctuary, the place where she had tried to keep his memory alive for 8 years. Flames climbed the walls, consuming red vinyl booths and chrome fixtures, destroying history and meaning in their indiscriminate hunger. Then Dylan pulled her inside and sealed the door behind them, and the world became darkness, broken only by the flashlight Frank had thought to grab. The cooler was maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, lined with metal shelves that had held food supplies Riley would never serve now. Temperature inside was 35 degrees cold, but not immediately lethal. The six of them crowded together in the small space, breathing hard, listening to the muffled roar of fire outside. "How long can we survive in here?" Riley asked the question everyone was thinking. Dylan checked his phone, the screen providing additional light. "It's 4:30 now. FBI arrives at 6, hour and a half." He looked around the cramped space, doing calculations Riley could see in his eyes. Oxygen temperature, both factors working against them, but not immediately critical. "We can make it. If they don't find us first," Sam voiced the other fear. "If they get in here, we're trapped. Nowhere to run. Then we make sure they don't get in." Grant positioned himself closest to the door, gun ready. Sound carried strangely in the metal box, making it hard to judge what was happening outside. They could hear muffled voices, footsteps, the continued roar of flames. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Riley found herself pressed against Dylan in the cramped quarters, their bodies touching from shoulder to hip. She could feel him breathing, could feel tension coiled in his muscles. Despite everything, despite the lies and manipulation and danger he had brought to her door, she found his presence comforting. Perhaps it was simply that he was human and alone and facing the same mortality she was. Or perhaps it was something more complicated that she did not have capacity to examine while waiting to discover if she would burn or freeze or suffocate. "Tell me about your daughter." Riley whispered it, needing to think about something other than death. "Sophie. Tell me about her." Dylan's voice in the darkness carried warmth that transformed him from federal agent back into father. "She's 9, wants to be a veterinarian, has this huge heart for animals, any animal. Last year she brought home an injured crow she found in the parking lot, nursed it back to health in a shoebox in her room. Named it Edgar after Edgar Allan Poe because she just learned about him in school and thought it was funny." Despite everything, Riley felt herself smile. "She sounds amazing, she is." Dylan's voice caught slightly. "I miss so much of her life doing this work. Her brother Michael, he's 6, obsessed with dinosaurs. Can name 50 different species. Emma, she's 4, just started preschool. Cries every morning when her mom drops her off, but apparently has fun once she settles in." He paused. "I joined DEA to make the world safer for kids like them. Safer for kids like that student who got paralyzed. But sometimes I wonder if the cost is too high." "The cost is your lies." Riley said it without judgment, simply stating fact. "The worst is living as someone you're not." "Yeah," Dylan's agreement was quiet. "The worst is my life becoming a performance. But tonight here, this is real. You're real, and I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth from the beginning." Before Riley could respond, footsteps approached the cooler door. Heavy boots on tile. Multiple people. Everyone in the cramped space, tensed, weapons raised, breaths held. The door handle rattled. Someone testing it, checking if it was locked. A voice carried through the metal, muffled but audible. "Check that cooler." Riley's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This was the moment. Discovery meant confined quarters combat, meant bullets in a metal box with nowhere to hide, meant death arriving in a space that smelled like refrigeration and fierce sweat. The door handle turned, slowly, deliberately. Riley watched it move with the surreal clarity of moments when time seemed to slow and stretch. Grant positioned himself directly in front of the door gun. Ray's face set an expression that promised violence. Sam flanked him despite his injury. Dylan shielded Riley with his body and gesture that was protective and presumptuous, but that Riley found she could not resent. The door began to open. Light from outside spilled in orange and flickering from flames. A silhouette appeared in the gap, male large wearing Iron Wolf's colors. Dylan shot first. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening, a physical assault on eardrums that made Riley cry out despite herself. The Iron Wolves member fell backward, hit but not dead, his shout of pain echoing. Then chaos erupted. More figures appeared in the doorway. Grant and Sam fired controlled bursts that lit up the cramped cooler with muzzle flash. Riley pressed herself against the back wall, the baseball bat gripped in white-knuckled hands, useless against guns, but representing her only option for defense. Frank, unarmed, grabbed a metal shelf and tore it from the wall with adrenaline-fueled strength, wielding it like a shield. The Iron Wolves returned fire bullets sparking off metal walls, the sound impossibly loud and impossibly close. One round passed so near Riley's head she felt the displacement of air. Dylan pushed her down, his body covering hers, his breathing harsh and rapid. The firefight could not have lasted more than 30 seconds, but felt eternal, trapped in metal box with bullets flying and smoke from gunfire mixing with smoke from the fire outside. Then Grant charged, simply rushed through the door, gun blazing, body checking the remaining Iron Wolves member who had been providing cover fire. They went down together in the ruined kitchen, grappling hand to hand. Sam followed, providing cover fire for Grant. Frank grabbed a knife from the knife block, somehow still standing amidst the flames, and moved to help. Dylan pulled Riley to her feet. "Stay behind me. We're getting out of this." They emerged from the cooler into hell. The kitchen was engulfed, flames climbing walls and spreading across ceiling. Smoke so thick it was nearly impossible to see. Heat that felt like it would blister skin through clothing. Riley could hear fighting, could hear Grant and Sam engage with multiple opponents, could hear Frank's voice shouting warnings. Dylan moved through the smoke, with her hand gripped in his, pulling her toward what she hoped was an exit. They rounded the corner of the industrial oven and found Sheriff Brennan standing there, gun raised, face illuminated by flames that made him look demonic. End of the line fed. The sheriff's voice carried satisfaction, the pleasure of someone who had finally cornered prey that had been too clever for too long. "You and the girl, both witnesses, can't leave witnesses." Riley felt Dylan tense, felt him calculating angles and odds, and coming up short. The sheriff had them dead to rights, gun already aimed, finger on trigger. This was how it ended. Burned in her father's diner or shot by a corrupt lawman. Either way, dead because she had opened a door in compassion. But Frank appeared from the smoke like an avenging ghost, wielding his knife with the skill of someone who had fought for survival in ways that predated firearms. He struck before the sheriff could adjust his aim blade, finding the soft tissue of Brennan's gun arm. The sheriff screamed, weapon clattering to the floor. Frank did not stop moving, did not give quarter-pressing attack with brutal efficiency that spoke to violence in his past. Dylan did not waste the opening. He fired twice controlled shots that hit Sheriff Brennan in the leg and shoulder, non-lethal, but incapacitating. The corrupt lawman went down writhing in pain amidst flames that were consuming everything. "We need to get out." Dylan's shout barely carried over the roar of fire. Buildings coming down, they fought their way toward the front of the diner where Grant and Sam had managed to subdue 2 Iron Wolves members. Bodies on the floor, some moving and some not. Smoke so thick that breathing felt like drowning. The ceiling creaked ominously, structural supports failing under heat stress. "Where's Viper?" Grant's question was urgent. "The leader. Where is he?" "He ran." Sam's answer came through gritted teeth, his injured shoulder clearly causing significant pain. "When we started winning, he grabbed a vehicle and ran. Then we need to run too." Frank helped Sam move toward the front door, both men stumbling through smoke and debris. "This whole place is about to collapse." They burst through the front door into freezing air that felt like salvation after the inferno inside. Snow still fell, but wind had diminished, storm finally breaking. Dawn was approaching, sky to the east, showing first hints of gray that preceded sunrise. Riley collapsed onto snow-covered ground, gasping in air that hurt her smoke-damaged lungs, but tasted like life. Behind them, the North Star Diner groaned like a dying creature. Flames shot through windows, smoke poured from every opening. The sign that had marked the building for 60 years crashed to the ground in a shower of sparks. Riley watched her father's legacy burn, watched 8 years of her life consumed by fire that felt biblical in its totality. "I'm sorry." Dylan knelt beside her, his face streaked with soot and blood. "I'm so sorry. Not your fault." Riley surprised herself with the forgiveness. "They killed my father 8 years ago. This was just finishing what they started." The sound of helicopters cut through the morning air. Multiple aircraft coming from the north. Riley looked up to see them emerge from the breaking storm, black against gray sky. FBI helicopters, DEA helicopters, the cavalry arriving with precision timing that would have been comedic if Riley had any energy left for humor. They landed in the parking lot, rotors whipping snow into blizzard conditions. Armed agents poured out dressed in tactical gear, moving with efficiency that spoke to extensive training. Within minutes, they had secured the scene, arrested the surviving Iron Wolves members, called for medical evacuation for the wounded. A woman in FBI jacket approached their group, her face all business. Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. Which one of you is Agent Wade Dillon? Stood wincing from injuries Riley had not noticed in the chaos. That's me. Good work staying alive. Agent Chen's approval was minimal, but genuine. We've got ambulances inbound, medical evacuation and for all of you, and we'll need statements, but that can wait until you're treated. Riley found herself guided toward a helicopter, a medic checking her for injuries she was too numb to feel. Grant, Sam, and Frank were similarly attended to. Dillon was pulled aside for immediate debriefing, though he kept looking back toward Riley as if to assure himself she was real and alive. The helicopter ride to Kalispell Regional Medical Center passed in blur of noise and exhaustion. Riley stared out the window at Montana spreading below, at the storm clouds finally dissipating, at dawn breaking over a landscape that looked peaceful and indifferent to the violence that had unfolded in its midst. She thought about her father, about how he had died in that building 8 years ago, about how she had nearly died there tonight. The symmetry felt significant, but she was too tired to determine what it meant. At the hospital, doctors checked her for smoke inhalation, treated minor burns. She had not realized she sustained prescribed pain medication and rest. Riley's mother arrived within an hour, having driven through barely cleared roads in a panic after seeing news reports about a siege at the North Star Diner. She pulled Riley into an embrace so tight it hurt, and Riley let herself cry for the first time since the siege began. I thought I lost you. Her mother's voice broke with emotion that had been building for 8 years, since the last time someone she loved had been endangered by circumstances beyond her control. I thought I lost you like I lost your father. I'm okay, Mom. Riley held her mother, feeling the woman's body shake with sobs. I'm alive. I survived. Over the following days, the story emerged in pieces. The FBI and DEA announced arrests of 23 members of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club on charges ranging from drug trafficking to murder. Sheriff Tom Brennan faced charges of corruption, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Dillon's 3-year undercover operation was revealed as one of the most extensive in DEA history, resulting in the dismantling of a trafficking network that moved over $50 million of narcotics annually. The media coverage was intense and unavoidable. Riley became the waitress who helped undercover agents survive Blizzard siege, a headline that reduced 8 hours of terror and transformation into clickable soundbite. Reporters camped outside her mother's house requesting interviews she consistently declined. She did not want to be a story. She wanted to process what had happened in private, wanted to grieve for her father properly now that she knew the truth, wanted to figure out who she was after a night that had fundamentally altered her understanding of herself. 2 weeks after the siege, Dillon visited her. He looked different in civilian clothes, without the leather vest and the persona of a Hell's Angel. More vulnerable, somehow more human. They sat in her mother's living room, cups of coffee growing cold between them. How are you? His question was simple, but his eyes searched her face with intensity that suggested he genuinely wanted to know. Alive. Riley's answer was automatic. Then she reconsidered. Angry, sad, confused, relieved. I don't know. All of those things and none of them. Dillon nodded, understanding. I quit DEA. The statement was casual but carried weight. Finished the debriefing, filed my final report, turned in my credentials. I'm done living lies. What will you do? Riley found she cared about the answer more than she had expected to. There's a teaching position open at Whitefish High School, English department. I applied. Interview is next week. Dillon smiled slightly. Figured if I was starting over, might as well start somewhere that matters. Here, Riley felt something in her chest tighten, though, whether it was hope or fear she could not determine. You're staying here, if you'll let me. Dillon's eyes held hers. I know I lied to you. I know I brought danger to your door. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness or a second chance. But that night, trapped in the cooler, thinking we might die, all I could think was that I'd met someone extraordinary, and I hadn't been honest with her. I want to fix that. I want to be someone you can trust. Riley considered his words, considered the man sitting across from her, who was neither the Hells Angel she had sheltered, nor the federal agent who had used her diner as a defensive position. He was just Dylan, flawed and honest and trying to become better. And isn't that what everyone is doing, she thought. Tell me 3 true things. Riley heard herself make the request. Not the lies you told us cover. 3 things about you that are completely real. Dylan thought for a moment, then spoke carefully. 1, I have 3 kids who mean more to me than anything in the world, and I failed them by choosing work over presence. 2, I was terrified that night in the diner, not of dying, but of dying without having told you that you're the bravest person I've ever met. 3, I want the chance to know you, the real you, and to let you know the real me. No undercover, no lies. Just 2 people figuring out if there's something worth building. Riley felt tears threaten, but held them back. Those are good things to be true about someone. Are they true enough? Dylan's vulnerability was complete, his expression open in ways she suspected he rarely allowed himself to be. They're a start. Riley surprised herself with the answer. But trust isn't rebuilt in a single conversation. If you're staying in Whitefish, we have time. We can see what happens when neither of us is running from something. Dylan's smile was genuine relief and hope mixed together. I'd like that. Grant, Sam, and Frank visited as a group a week later. They brought groceries, flowers, and news that the Great Falls chapter of the Hells Angels had been officially cleared of all criminal charges. Dylan's investigation had proven they were not involved in trafficking, had in fact been victims of Iron Wolf's frame attempts. The federal government was issuing formal apology and compensation. We wanted to say thank you. Grant's presence filled her mother's small living room. For saving our lives, for not giving up when things got bad, for being braver than you had any reason to be. You saved mine too. Riley pointed out the obvious. I would have died if you hadn't fought. That's how it works. Frank's weathered face creased with smile. People save each other. That's what we do when we're at our best. What happens now? Riley asked. For you all. We ride to Tommy's funeral. Sam answered, his shoulder healing well. Pay our respects properly the way we should have a month ago. Then we get back to our lives, which are quieter now without federal investigation hanging over our heads. Grant handed Riley an envelope. Inside was a check for $85,000 for your mother's surgery. From the chapter. We take care of people who take care of us. Riley stared at the numbers, her throat tight. I can't accept this. You already saved 4 lives. Grant's voice was gentle but firm. Let us save 1. Your mother deserves to live. Let us make that happen. The surgery took place on a Thursday afternoon in early March. Riley sat in the waiting room for 6 hours at Dylan beside her, despite their relationship being too undefined to justify his presence, except that he wanted to be there and she wanted him there. When the surgeon emerged with news that the procedure was successful, that her mother would recover fully and could expect 20 more years of healthy life, Riley cried in Dylan's arms with relief that felt like absolution. 3 months after the siege, Riley stood in the empty lot where the North Star Diner had stood for 60 years. The building had been demolished completely, nothing remaining except concrete foundation and memories. The owner had taken insurance money and decided not to rebuild. The era of small highway diners was ending, he explained. Better to sell the land and move on. Riley understood. Some things were meant to be destroyed so something new could grow. She was working on a book, a long-form narrative about the night the storm brought angels and demons and fire. The writing came easier than she expected, words flowing from someplace inside her that had been waiting to be tapped. Tessa had connected her with a literary agent in Seattle who was interested in the story. The agent thought it could be a bestseller if Riley was willing to be honest about her fear, her transformation, her father's murder. She was. Honesty, she had learned, was the only currency that mattered. Everything else was just performance. Just lies, people told to make themselves feel safer in a world that offered no safety at all. Dylan got the teaching job. Started in January teaching English to middle schoolers who had no idea their new teacher had spent 3 years infiltrating a motorcycle club. He was good at it, Riley discovered when she visited his classroom one afternoon. Patient with students, enthusiastic about literature, present in ways he had not been able to be while living lies. They were dating, though. That word felt inadequate for what they were building. Something slow and careful, constructed on foundation of honesty about their flaws and fears. Dylan's kids visited every other weekend, and Riley found she enjoyed their chaos, their noise, their absolute certainty that life was an adventure to be embraced rather than endured. Grant, Sam, and Frank visited monthly, always bringing food and stories and news of the Brotherhood. The Great Falls chapter had become known for their charity work, the reputation Dylan had built as cover becoming reality as the club leaned into community service. They had helped 12 families in 3 months paying medical bills and preventing evictions and providing resources that government programs could not or would not provide. On a Sunday morning in late spring, Riley drove to the cemetery where her father was buried. She had not visited in over a year, guilt about absence mixing with grief about presence. But today felt right. The grass was green, flowers, blooming, birds singing in trees that provided shade over headstones, marking lives that had ended. Michael Morgan, beloved husband and father, 19/6/2017. The inscription was simple, revealing nothing about the man he had been or the legacy he had left. Riley knelt beside the grave, one hand touching the cold granite. "I know what happened now, Dad." Her voice was quiet, meant only for the dead who could not answer but might somehow hear. "I know they killed you. I know it wasn't just bad luck or genetic predisposition. I know you died because you saw something you shouldn't have seen." She paused, gathering thoughts that had been forming for months. "And I want you to know that they're facing justice. Sheriff Brennan is going to prison. The Iron Wolves chapter is dismantled. The men who killed you will spend the rest of their lives behind bars." The wind rustled through trees, carrying scent of lilacs and fresh earth. Riley continued, needing to say things she had been holding back. "I almost died in your diner, in the place you loved. But I didn't. I survived because you taught me courage. You taught me that doing the right thing matters more than safety. That compassion is strength, not weakness. That people are human underneath all the labels, in uniforms and appearances." She felt tears streaming down her face but did not wipe them away. "And Dad, I'm not stuck anymore. I'm writing. Really writing. The book is about you, about me, about that night. About how fear and courage are two sides of the same coin. About how opening a door can change everything." A robin landed on the headstone, its red breast bright against gray granite. Riley watched it for a moment before it flew away, disappearing into blue sky. "I met someone." A small smile crossed her face. "He lied to me initially, which you probably wouldn't love. But he's honest now. He's good with kids. He makes me laugh. He sees me, really sees me, not just the scared waitress who never left home. I think you'd like him. Or maybe you'd hate him for lying. I don't know, but I'm giving it a chance." She stood slowly, brushing grass from her jeans. "I love you, Dad. I miss you every single day. But I'm okay now. Better than okay. I'm living instead of just surviving. And I think that would make you proud." Riley walked back to her car, Dylan waiting in the passenger seat. He had offered to come with her, but understood when she said this was something she needed to do alone. Now she climbed behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out of the cemetery with feeling that was not closure exactly, but something like peace. That evening, the Hells Angels Great Falls chapter held a memorial service for Tommy Hayes. Riley attended at Grant's invitation, Dylan beside her. Both of them wearing clothes that felt too formal for the occasion, but that seemed required. The gathering was in a park outside town, 50 bikers in full colors, families and friends, people whose lives Tommy had touched during his 53 years. Grant spoke about brotherhood and sacrifice. Frank told stories about Tommy's sense of humor. Sam talked about Tommy's mechanical genius, his ability to fix anything with engine or wheels. Then they opened the floor to anyone who wanted to share memories. Riley found herself standing, Dylan's hand squeezing hers in support before she consciously decided to speak. "I never met Tommy Hayes," her voice carried across the assembly, "but he saved my life anyway. He was investigating the people who killed my father 8 years ago. His death, his murder led to the investigation that brought justice for my family. So I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for caring about truth. Thank you for your sacrifice." She sat down to silence that felt respectful rather than uncomfortable. Then Grant approached, pulled her into an embrace that was fatherly and grateful. After the service, people approached her individually. Tommy's widow thanked her for coming. Tommy's daughter, a woman in her late 20s, hugged her and cried. Slowly, Riley realized she was being integrated into something larger than herself. She was becoming part of a community that had started as terrifying strangers and had become something approaching family. A month later, Riley sold her book. The advance was substantial enough that she could quit her job at a different diner where she had been working part-time. The publisher wanted changes, wanted her to be more explicit about the violence and fear, but also wanted her to keep the core message intact. That courage looks like opening a door. That kindness is radical act in a world that rewards selfishness. That people are more complex than the labels applied to them. She agreed to all of it. The book would publish in a year, giving her time to work with editor and promote the story. Already there was interest from Hollywood from producers who saw a potential movie in her tale of survival and redemption. Riley found the attention overwhelming but also validating. Her story mattered. Her father's story mattered. Tommy Hayes' story mattered. On a Saturday afternoon in August, exactly 1 year after her father's death, and 3 months after the siege, Riley stood in the parking lot where the North Star Diner used to stand. The lot had been cleared, prepared for development. A gas station chain had purchased the land planning to build a modern facility that would serve travelers with more efficiency than the diner ever had. But before construction began, Riley had negotiated permission to place a memorial. It was a small bronze plaque mounted on stone pedestal, but it carried weight that transcended its size. In memory of Michael Morgan, 1906-2017, cook, father, friend to travelers, and Tommy Hayes, 1964-2017, brother, mechanic, seeker of truth, both killed here by those who fear justice, both remembered by those who love courage. Courage is doing what's right when you're terrified. Below the inscription was second plaque. Riley had debated this addition, had worried it was too much, but ultimately decided the full story deserved telling. On this site, December 2017, 4 men nearly died in a blizzard. One woman opened a door when others would have kept it locked. In the hours that followed, strangers became family, fear transformed into courage, and justice was served for those who had been killed. May all who pass here remember kindness is never wasted. Compassion is never weakness. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is open a door. Dylan stood beside her, reading the plaques with expression that mixed pride and sadness. It's perfect. Grant, Sam, and Frank arrived together on their motorcycles, chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. They had ridden from Great Falls for the dedication ceremony, bringing flowers and grief and respect. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 30 people total. Riley's mother, Tessa, the publisher's representative, a reporter from the local paper, Tommy's widow and daughter, the survivors of a night that had changed all of them. Riley spoke briefly, her voice steady despite emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. My father died here 8 years ago. I almost died here 8 months ago. This place has been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed again. But the memory remains. The courage remains. The love remains. She paused, looking at the people assembled. We're here because we refuse to forget. We refuse to accept that murder can go unpunished, that corruption can go unchecked, that people are defined by their worst stereotypes rather than their best actions. We're here because we believe in second chances and honest conversations, and the possibility that strangers can become family when circumstances demand it. Grant stepped forward, adding his voice. Tommy Hayes died investigating the criminals who thought they were above justice. Michael Morgan died because he witnessed something that should have been stopped. They were killed by people who believed power and violence could silence truth. He looked directly at Riley. But truth has a way of surviving, has a way of being carried by people brave enough to speak it. Michael and Tommy's legacy isn't their deaths. It's the justice that came after. It's the families saved. It's the lives changed. It's this memorial that says we remember, we honor, and we continue the work they started. After the ceremony ended, after the small crowd dispersed and only Riley and Dylan remained, they sat on the foundation where the diner used to stand. The sun was setting, painting Montana sky in shades of orange and purple that felt almost too beautiful for a place where so much violence had occurred. Do you have regrets? Dylan asked quietly. About that night, about opening the door. Riley considered the question seriously, thought about all the ways that single choice had transformed her life. She had lost the diner, had lost her illusions about safety and justice, had lost the comfortable numbness that came from living in the past rather than the present. But she had gained so much more. had gained understanding of her own strength, had gained relationships that mattered, had gained purpose and direction in the knowledge that she could survive things she never thought possible. No regrets. Her answer was simple and completely true. I'm glad I opened that door, even knowing what came after, even knowing the price, I'm glad. Dylan pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching the sun disappear below the horizon. Tomorrow, Riley would continue writing, would work with her editor, would help her mother with physical therapy, would have dinner with Dylan's kids, who were slowly accepting her presence in their father's life, would live the complicated, messy, beautiful existence that came from choosing courage over fear. But tonight, she sat in the place where her father had died and where she had been reborn, and she let herself feel grateful. Grateful for the storm that brought four strangers to her door. Grateful for the fire that destroyed a building but could not destroy memory. Grateful for the dawn that arrived after the longest night of her life. Grateful for second chances and honest conversations and the possibility that people could change, could grow, could become more than their circumstances suggested they should be. The first star appeared in the darkening sky. Riley made a wish, something she had not done since childhood. She wished for her father's peace, for Tommy Hayes' legacy, for Grant and Sam and Frank's continued brotherhood, for Dylan's honesty, for her mother's health, for her own courage to continue when the next challenge arrived, as challenges always did. But mostly she wished that somewhere, somehow, her father knew what had happened in his diner that night, knew that his death had not been meaningless, knew that his daughter had survived and grown and become someone who understood that his final lesson, the one about courage, had been the most important thing he ever taught her. The wind carried scent of pine and snow from distant mountains. Dylan's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in the comfortable silence of people who had survived impossible things together and emerged stronger for it. And Riley Morgan, 24 years old writer, daughter survivor, sat in the ruins of her father's legacy and felt something she had not felt in 8 years. Hope, pure and uncomplicated and strong enough to build a future on. The storm had passed, the fire had burned out, the siege had ended, and life, complicated and beautiful and terrifying and full of possibility, continued forwarded into whatever dawn came next, the end. Epilogue. 18 months later, the book release party was held in a renovated barn outside Whitefish. 200 people crowded into space that smelled like wood and hay and possibility. Riley's publisher had wanted a venue in New York or Los Angeles, something sophisticated and media-friendly, but Riley had insisted on Montana. This was where the story happened. This was where it should be celebrated. When The Storm Brought Angels had been published to critical acclaim and commercial success that exceeded everyone's expectations. It had spent 12 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Film rights had sold for 7 figures. Riley had appeared on morning talk shows and podcasts telling her story of the night that changed her life. But the success felt less important than the people gathered in the barn tonight. Her mother healthy and vibrant, laughing with friends who had supported them through difficult years. Grant, Sam, and Frank clean-shaven and dressed in suits that made them look almost respectable, though the motorcycle colors folded carefully in the corner left no doubt about their identity. Tommy's widow and daughter, who had become friends during the months of the book's creation. Dylan and his 3 kids, who now called Riley by name and who had learned that families could be built as well as born. Tessa approached with champagne, her smile wide and genuine. I'm so proud of you. You did it. You told the truth. I told a version of the truth. Riley corrected gently. The full truth is more complicated. The full truth always is. Tessa clinked her glass against Riley's. But you got close enough that it matters. The publisher wanted Riley to give a speech, but she kept it short. Thank you for being here, for supporting this book, for believing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who chooses courage over fear, compassion over safety, truth over comfortable lies. She raised her glass to my father, Michael Morgan, who taught me that bravery looks like doing the right thing even when you're terrified. To Tommy Hayes, who died seeking justice. To Grant, Sam, and Frank, who showed me that people are more than their reputations. To Dylan, who taught me that honesty is harder and more valuable than lies. And to everyone who has ever opened a door when it would have been easier to keep it locked. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers that shook the barn's rafters. Riley felt tears threaten, but held them back, determined to be present for this moment rather than overwhelmed by it. Later, after most people had left and the party had wound down to just close friends, Dylan found her standing outside looking at stars that blazed in Montana sky. "How does it feel to have your story out in the world terrifying?" Riley admitted with a laugh. "Like I'm naked in public. But also right, like this is what I was supposed to do." Dylan pulled her close and Riley leaned into him, feeling the solid reality of his presence. They had been together for over a year now, building relationships slowly and carefully. His kids had adjusted to their father's new life. Riley had adjusted to being part of a family that was chosen rather than inherited. It was not perfect, but it was real. "I love you." Dylan said it simply without preamble or justification. "Wanted you to know that." Riley looked up at him, at his face illuminated by starlight, and felt certainty settle into her bones. "I love you too, even though you lied to me, even though you brought chaos into my carefully controlled life. Maybe because of those things, because you showed me that safety is overrated and life is meant to be lived rather than survived." They stood together in the Montana night, two people who had met in the worst circumstances and had built something beautiful from the wreckage. Inside the barn, laughter and music continued. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in patterns that had guided travelers for millennia. And Riley Morgan, who had opened a door in a blizzard and changed her life forever, felt grateful for every moment that had led her here. The storm had brought angels, but it had also brought demons, fire, violence, transformation, and ultimately, salvation. And in the end, that was what life looked like. A mixture of light and darkness, fear and courage, lies and truth, all woven together into tapestry that was beautiful precisely because it was complicated. Riley had learned to stop waiting for permission to be brave, had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, had learned that people were more than their worst moments, that families could be chosen, that love could grow in the most unlikely places. And she had learned finally that her father's legacy was not the building where he worked, but the lesson he taught. That doing what's right matters more than doing what's safe. That compassion is strength. That opening doors, literal and metaphorical, is how the world changes one person at a time. The night was cold, but Riley felt warm, held by the man she loved, surrounded by people who had become her chosen family, living a life she had built from ashes and courage, and the refusal to accept that fear should dictate her choices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories to write, new doors to open. But tonight was about celebration, about acknowledging how far she had traveled from the terrified waitress who had stood in a freezing diner and made a choice that changed everything. Dylan kissed the top of her head. "Ready to go back inside?" "Not yet." Riley wanted to hold this moment for a little longer. "Let's stay here. Just a few more minutes." They stayed under the stars, two survivors holding each other against the Montana cold, grateful for the storm that brought them together, and for the courage that allowed them to build something lasting from circumstances that should have destroyed them. And somewhere in the night, Riley's father and Tommy Hayes looked down from whatever afterlife existed, proud of the people they had helped create through their lives and deaths, satisfied that justice had been served and that their legacy continued in the choices made by those who remembered them. The wind whispered through the trees, the stars blazed overhead, and life, complicated and beautiful and full of possibilities that could only be accessed through courage, continued forward into the infinite darkness and light.